victory and the agony of defeat.
Madison, great ball around the corner, Petticini, he beats them all! Junior Polar out wide, knocked away from Trindle, Sharks coming through, none of them can hold this!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host John, also known as 4020. Joining me for another Juniors preview podcast is my good mate Sixties. Big fella, it's an exciting week, the final week of the regular season in the junior reps, which means the Lisa Fiola, the Tarsha Gale, the Harold Matts and the SG Ball, they're all fighting for berths in the finals. A few of those teams have already locked them up, actually.
I'd say three of them pretty safe.
And I think the only one at risk there in that three would be the Tarsha Gale due to a absolutely...
No, it's actually the Harold Matts would be the one that's in contention. The
Tarsha Gale technically can be knocked out. It would require a 180-point swing in points differential across two different games. The Harold Matthews are fighting for a place in the finals with their own destiny in their hands. So, yes. All four teams in the mix, which is fantastic to see. We'll get to that shortly, though, mate. As always, first, though, checking on how you're doing. It's been a busy week. Eels in action across 7 games again. So we got plenty on the docket. Going to miss a bit of that on Saturday, which includes a couple of these junior rep games, unfortunately, due to some unfortunate clashed scheduling. But how you doing, mate?
Yeah, no, doing really well, mate. Great day outside for a start. So I'm not sure what time people get to listen to this, but as people may be aware,
on both our cameras coming pouring in.
As people may be aware, we've now, as we've headed towards the pointy end of the junior reps season, we're going with this dedicated junior reps podcast. And of course, with thanks to Paraleagues, the home of the Eels, for their extraordinarily generous support of Junior Rugby League in the Parramatta district, and also for their support of the work that we do with the junior representatives. Yes, look, mate, it has been a busy time. As I said, this is the pointy end of the season now for the junior reps, and as for the Eels in the first grade, well, got out to training yesterday. I'm writing about something at the moment with regard to the Eels. I won't go too much into it, but I was very much buoyed by what I saw yesterday, and I won't say anything more than that. But I really did think that it was one of the better. Not that there's been anything wrong with their preps, but I thought it was one of the better sessions that I've seen this season. So, as I said, it's buoyed me at a time that I need a little bit of buoying.
I think a lot of fans could use a bit of buoying right now. I think almost all the fans could use a little bit of buoying right now. It's been that kind of start to the season, but good to hear, mate. And good shout out to the sponsors. And as always, no matter what platform you're listening to us on, like and subscribe helps with those metrics and helps us grow on these digital platforms to reach more and more fans of the blue and gold, and maybe some fans beyond that, given that we do talk a bit of general NRL too. So it'd be much appreciated. But Sixties, let's get into it, mate, because we've got action on Saturday and Sunday in the junior reps as they tune up for the finals. It's a big slate of games, of course, with the Eels taking on a traditional rival over in the ladies' space, whereas in the fellas, they've got it's traditional rivals on both sides. One, our sister club in Manly, and one, our sort of more traditional rival for the 80s in the Bulldogs. Well, I guess Manly were rivals in the 80s too, but Bulldogs famously splitting the success in the 80s of Parramatta. But let's start with Lisa Fiola, who come into this game in the hunt for a top seed. They are in third place, 6 wins, 1 loss. Keeps them in touch with the Central Coast Roosters, who are also 6 wins and 1 loss. But the team they're playing, 6 wins, 1 draw, sitting on an undefeated season, like our SG Ball, that same sort of not perfect but not defeated either season. The Canterbury Bulldogs, mate, they've been the benchmark in the Lisa Fiola and the Tarsha Gale for the last couple of years. No surprises. They're right back up there again with a whopping plus 355 points differential in that undefeated run there. Eels coming in.
They are a massive. Let's point out right at the start with the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
They are a massive recruitment club at junior level. They scour.
They've been hyper aggressive. They've poured resources in, and look, if you haven't got the established pathways set, that's what you got to do, right? 60s, you got to be very, very aggressive. We've seen the Sydney Roosters in the past do it in the male space with Mats and Ball, and the Dogs are trying to build their pathways early on by recruiting really, really aggressively. And to their credit, they've identified the right players, and they're doing incredibly well there.
I think they've got a bit of an influx from New Zealand.
Yeah, and Western Sydney too. They definitely have.
And New Zealand and Western Sydney out because the Bulldogs junior rugby league isn't a huge catchment. I think from memory they've got about 9 clubs, not too many that play women's rugby league. So they have to recruit from outside. Now, they then would consider these players eventually to be Bulldogs developed players, Bulldogs juniors, because they recruit them and put them into their junior pathways and develop them towards senior football through their pathways, which is fair enough. But as I said, you are talking about a powerhouse in this grade because I guess that it is a significant investment that they make because they're recruiting at this level. And the success is there when you talk about their teams going through at the top of the table in the girls' pathways teams. And as you just pointed out from that differential, they really have been sweeping past their opponents during this season. So it's a massive ask of the Eels. And even though the Eels have lost, Lisa Fiol have lost one game and only one game, they haven't faced an opponent like the Bulldogs.
But surprisingly, the one game they did, not drop, but draw, came against the 10th place St. George Dragons, who have got 1 win and 1 draw to their name. So very, very interesting stuff there that the Dogs had that in them, which would suggest that there is a chink in the armour. There is a vulnerability to exploit if they are off the pace. But
if they rest players.
Or maybe they rested players. So we don't have the full context there, and I'm not going to go back and hunt that particular team list. But speaking of team lists, let's look at how the Eels shape up this 160s. At fullback, they have Ire Sevilla. On the wings, Sienna Bonello comes back into the team. And on the opposite side, which will be the right sideline, is the outstanding Freedom Crichton Rapati. That pair of flankers has been very good for the Eels this year, although Sienna's been out for a couple of weeks. So good to have her back in the fold. In the centres, we've got Georgia Wanzi and Cody Tuamaseve. In the halves, Sharon Latapu and Tamika Withers, which rounds out a really good 1-7 for the Parramatta Eels. Front row sees Mere Sivo starting this week, and she'll play alongside Isabella Bell. Bailey Marchong will be the dummy half, no surprises there. On the edges, again, no surprises. Kaizen Morgan Pritchard and Mitzi Cairns have been the entrenched and established edge back roles for the Eels this year, and they've done a great job. Alicia Meza will be the lock forward. On the interchange, you've got Halo Talangi, who we believe is a sibling of Blaze and Ryder, but we're not 100% certain. But
I think I'm pretty certain. I'm not certain, but I'd be confident that she is.
Yep.
So,
and then alongside Halo, you've got Anika Penatane, Olivia Saba, and Evelyn Kuwendu. The extended roster has Kaivinia O'Callaghan Ahio, and then Riley Cash and Hine Rikiti. So Eels going for a deep extended bench heading to this one with options obviously up until game day to shuffle around their top 17. But it's probably as good as the Eels have looked 1-17 all season. 60s, I think perhaps at lock forward, I'm not sure what ended up happening to, give me one sec here. If I can just pull it up here, to Katia Duff, she must be injured. 60, she's been out for a couple of weeks now. So that would be the most notable absentee from this team list. But Alicia Meza does a good job in replacement for her. And the Eels, looking like a pretty strong team 1-17 right now.
Absolutely, mate. You can't question the results that the Eels have got this year in the Lisa Fiola Cup. But, like all the teams across the Eels grades, there's been some weeks where players have been rested to ensure eligibility for as many players in the squad as possible for finals football, because I think it's you have to play at least 2 games
I
throughout
would
the
imagine
season.
2 games is the cutoff based on what we've seen across the 4 teams. One name that I did forget to mention in terms of being a big out is Leonie Vey, who hurt herself against the Tigers, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully she's back next week. But Eels obviously got some depth there to help cover her there. But you're right, 60s. It's there could be a case of some final picks for eligibility here, because it is important. I mean, the worst thing you want to have is have someone go down in this game or next week if you go through, and then not have someone be able to cover an injury in those 2 games because you missed out on eligibility. So if the Eels are doing that, it's obviously a bit of due diligence, isn't it? Just making sure that their roster is fully activated for the finals. But equally, they've still named a strong team to challenge the what look to be the minor premiers.
Yeah. So I guess this game is a little bit about qualification, obviously, but also I think it's a statement game from the Eels.
Definitely.
You know how much of a threat are they going to pose to the Bulldogs in finals football? Should they end up facing them at some stage? So you want the Bulldogs coming out of the game with maybe some question marks about themselves, if possible, and whether that's secured through a victory or through them, getting
punched in the face by, like, in terms of football, by not like actual fights, but getting bloodied up a bit by the Parramatta Eels. Yeah, you want them second guessing themselves. I agree. And
what we've seen from the Eels this year, John, is when they execute the sort of sets that the coach is looking for, they look like a very, very good football team, because Ryan Walker literally has a team where he can play just classic rugby league with. You've got the forwards who are powerful. They've got some skill. They've got a dummy half that they're running off who seems to be very, very good at reading the play. Seems to know almost exactly when to take a dart herself, as well as does a very good job generally of taking the team forward. Then they've got a back line who, and it's really evidence, I think, of the growth in the women's game, is you actually see the halves that do classic halves work. They really do set up the players outside them. You see a mix in their game as well. The range of passes they can throw, the kicking game that's there. So really, and then of course they got those strike weapons that are in the team. We saw that incredible try recently that Freedom Crichton-Rapati scored in the corner, which any NRL winger would have been proud of. The way that she was, in air over the sideline and got the ball down in the corner somehow. That wingers train for that sort of stuff now, and it's evident that it's trained for now right all the way down through junior representatives, because it caught the attention of a lot of people, that grounding. And the fullback has now, I think Iria she only came in. Oh, it's probably not pronounced Iria. We should. Is it Ire?
Ire or
Ire? Yeah. Very good point there, John. With the pronunciation with the R's.
We're always on board to take any sort of insight there too. So if anyone is listening to this and knows the correct pronunciation, feel free to correct us. So
Ire, I don't know if she was actually in the team at the start of the year, round 1, but she certainly made her presence felt since she's come in. So look, they've got strike weapons in the side. As I said, it's just to me, it's a very, very well balanced team. And, they've been well served off the interchange all season as well.
It's been a different battery of players as they've sort of dealt with injuries and whatnot across the season and player eligibility selections, but they've collectively done a really good job. And
yeah. The only thing is, and it's virtually like every team in the Pathways football, is where there's times where they become their own worst enemies, not completing a set after points.
And we sound like, crotchety old men going on about, hold on to the ball. But anyone that's watched junior reps will quickly realise how, like you said, there are just passages of play where almost any team, it's not a Parramatta Eels thing. If you're backing any team in the reps, it feels like they become self-destructive. And the team that minimises those passages goes so much higher up the ladder. So, and
yes.
Look, this is a good team, 60s. Like you said, it feels very well-rounded. Maybe... and it's not a shot at the team, but like the Bulldogs might have like more out and out stars perhaps, but 1-17, the Eels are a very good outfit here, and there are a lot of players that are going to progress through the pathways beyond Lisa Fiola. But
I can see some NRLW players for certain in this lineup, and I'm not going to put pressure on.
Put a spotlight on them, because anyone that watches these games will quickly pick up on players they like from this squad. But again, it's a very well-balanced team. Of course, you're going to be, like, in terms of putting a spotlight on the players, in the context of this game, you'd be looking towards the spine because they have so much influence in any team. But Sharon Latapu and Tamika Withers are a good set of contrasting halves. I really like when Tamika takes on the line early because it helps set a tone for that left edge, and she can ball play.
Carries that ball in two hands,
yes.
Like it's hitting the line. And that's what I was saying. They are very, very good halves and their kit bag of skills and their reading of the game at this point at their ages, I think is really, really good.
And in that vein, Latapu, you want to see her taking on the line early in a sense of running, because that's her real strength. But she also brings a really nice short kicking game as well.
Yes.
And she's been able to pick out or isolate the ball away from the fullback multiple times this year with her grubber kick. And that's certainly going to be a scoring option for the Parramatta Eels here. But then across the park, I've already praised the wingers. We've praised Sevilla at fullback. She's ultra consistent. Her kick returns in the wet last week were huge in the context of getting the Eels on the front foot. Bailey Ma Chong, you've pointed out 60's incredible vision for the grade. The forward pack are very good. No Leonie Vade does hurt, but Mere Sivo and Isabella Bell have been rock solid. Again, just holding on to the ball will be crucial for those middles. Kaiser Morgan Pritchard and Mitzi Cairns are big dynamic back rowers. And then the interchange, we get our first look at Halo this week, I believe. But Penatani, Saba was very good last week. Evan Coendo we've seen this year and last year do good things. So a lot of reliable contributors across the park here, and it's just going to be a matter of holding onto the ball against the Bulldogs, because spotting them field position and opportunities will lead to a deficit on the scoreboard very quickly. But if you get your nose in the contest, the Bulldogs are not unbeatable. We've seen them lose in the finals. We've seen them lose, here and there in the regular season, or in this case, draw against the Dragons. So take care of what you can take care of in your own park, and just minimise your errors, because we've actually been. It's funny because I think if you look at the scoreboard, we've had a couple of games that look like they blew out against the Dogs. There was one against Belmore in the last couple of years that jumps to mind as well, where ultimately the scoreboard blew out to 40-something points. But for a good chunk of that game, we were right in the contest, but just kept turning the ball over, and eventually it just proved to be too much. So minimise those mistakes, and who knows what happens.
Yeah, John, this is one where, you know what, I just want to watch this game. I don't want to go into it with a prediction about what's going to unfold, because even though I've talked about, it's been a very good season for the Eels and how well balanced the team is, I think they've got another level they can go to. I don't think they haven't produced their best footballers yet, and I don't want to go in with expect a tip that they're going to beat the undefeated Bulldogs, because this Bulldogs team's a juggernaut, and there's no escaping from that. But I think they can trouble the Bulldogs. I genuinely do, and as I said, I think they've got another level they can go to. So my prediction is the Eels will trouble the Bulldogs here, and it will be a close contest. And here's to them getting over the top of the Dogs, giving them something to think about as they go into finals football. So that's the extent of my tip, John, on this one.
I like the theory behind that. It'll be interesting to see, I suppose, the counterpoint to that will be, from a positive sense, if Ryan Walker, as the coach, is careful not to overhype his charges for this game, because the finals lurk one game behind that, and you don't want to be emotionally over-investing into a game that ultimately, obviously it can mean a lot in the context of your headspace, but ultimately in terms of the ladder does not mean much. So it'd be interesting to see how the Eels handle this one, what sort of mood they come out to this game with. Are they going to be fired up and aggressive? Are they going to be just focused on getting through their sets and sort of not playing for themselves, but having that sort of composed, almost reserved approach to the game? And I think we'll know a lot about the game and about the team within the first 5 to 10 minutes, 60s, based on how they handle the sort of climate.
And John, what about the intangible? Playing at the new Kellyville Centre of Excellence.
We didn't mention that,
time.
but yeah, I think that does add sort of an emotional charging to this game. They've spent their season at Eric Tweedo at home largely, but they've been all around Sydney and New South Wales. But now they finally come home proper and have a chance to play at the Centre of Excellence at Kellyville, at what is now Parramatta's spiritual home ground when it comes to training and prep and everything that comes with getting ready for the season proper. So yeah, this is unfortunately we don't get to see it because it clashes with both our pre-game show for the NRL game and then also the Cup and NRL game in general. But this is a really, really cool moment for the ladies and a chance to christen Kellyville with a big performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, that then leads us to the follow-up game on Saturday, which is the Tarsha Gale Cup match. And this really is going to be a challenge for the Tarsha Gale girls.
Yeah, so the Lissafiol, they kicked off at 1:45 p.m. at Kellyville, and this one takes place at 3:15 p.m. So this is the final in a 3-game docket at Kellyville with the Jersey Flag, who will cover in a separate podcast. That'll be our normal preview podcast. But the Tarsha Gale do wrap up the day taking on the Bulldogs. They come into this round sitting in, if I can pull up my ladder here, 5th place. We're chasing the Canterbury Bulldogs in first place, who, like their younger sisters in the Lissafiol, 6 wins, 1 draw. And I don't know who they draw against because there are 2 sets of games that were drawn this year. But funnily enough, the Dragons in 10th place again, but also the other 2 teams that drew were the 12th placed or second last Bears and the 13th placed or last Seagulls. So somewhere along the line, either they've rested the players or they've had a funny trip up again with the Bulldogs, or half a trip up because they didn't lose. But the Eels in 5th place, they've got a 4-win, 3-loss record with 2 other teams sharing the same record with them in the Indigenous Academy Roosters and the Sharks. Knights have 5 wins and 3 losses, but obviously the bye taking place for the other teams to balance the equation. So the Eels, they're pretty much inside the 8, but still have got work to do in terms of seeding. And yeah, I'll get to the team with first 60s before we talk about this, because there is a lot of work to be done for the Tarsha Gale. We know that they've got talent, but they've been in a bit of a slide of self-inflicted mannerisms in recent weeks. But at fullback, you have Dallas Graham-Wivell. On the wings, Sualo Lafonga, who we saw make her, I think it was her debut last week, but she'll be running on one wing opposite of Maria Fasavalu Farmasuli. And then in the centres, you've got Jessamine Alawale, and then Kylia Gray, who we know more conventionally is a back rower, but is filling out in the centres for the Parramatta Eels right now. In the halves, Samuel Lee Gunn to Awai and Aliyah Sufan are your 5'8" and halfback respectively. In the front row, you've got Tess McWilliams and Taylor Falanico, Ava Jones at dummy half. Fontaine Tafua and Matoisha Kalepo on your edges, with Riverly Arlo at lock forward. Then on the interchange, you've got Armani Leah Ovae, Roy Muir, Lilietta Pooley, and Alana O'Loughlin. Extended roster has Anahira at Payakau, and Layla Uwick as the two reserve players there. And yeah, the Bulldogs, you see a lot of rugby league surnames in there. There's an Iramia, McGregor. Who else we got there? It was more prominent in the Tarsha Gale, but definitely a few NRL surnames there. But again, just a dominant team on the Canterbury side of the ledger. And the way the Eels have played 60s, which we're going to talk about now, they're going to enter this game as very heavy underdogs because we keep banging on about it, but the dropping of the ball, the errors, the mental lapses that sort of just come on them in waves. And they'll play some really good football. And we saw them start against the West Tigers in difficult conditions a couple of weeks back that way, where they got out to an early 2-score lead, but then just really, really poor lapses. And then for the first time this season, because to their credit, they've defended pretty well all year, but against the West Tigers in particular, their goal line defense really failed them. And unfortunately, they weren't able to back that up last week. They got undone, I believe, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they actually played the Steelers.
Yeah, and
I think the Steelers were in
second place, and it was almost the same script as against the West Tigers, out to a 10-0 lead, and then it was wet conditions, and then they just let it slip. And the big thing that really stood out in this game that was incredibly frustrating, we touched on it when we were breaking down the game, was that the kick pressure just evaporated, and it allowed the Steelers to have their way, kicking to their left edge to Parramatta's right. And suddenly, the early games in that half were rushed in that regard, and they produced errors from the Steelers. But then suddenly they had time, and they scored a couple of tries, and then that was enough to get them back in the contest before their fullback, was it? The Pale, or the halfback? I'm getting it wrong. It was their front rower, stormed over at the end, or near the end, to steal the game. So they've been in so many contests, 60s. Like they have not really been blown out, barring that ambush against the Sharks, where they came out of the bye and were done in by, 22 points, 36-14, I think it was. So beyond that, they've been up to their eyeballs in every game. But if you go back and look at how those games actually were broken down, it was just, you mentioned it earlier, but those runs of errors that completely changed the context of a game. The Tarsha Gale have been very guilty of that in the second half of this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're talking about like that game last week against the Steelers, they led 10-0 at halftime.
They did, yeah.
And I think from memory, what happened was they lost possession at the kickoff of the second half.
Yeah, I think you're right. We started with an error off the kickoff, I believe.
Yeah. And anyway, when the tries were scored off the kicks, it was one quickly followed by the other. And it was like the 10-0 lead evaporated like almost instantly after half-time. And then it was an arm wrestle for the rest of that half in the wet conditions. And it was like, okay, whoever's going to make the mistakes here is going to be in trouble because, to be fair, both teams were making some errors in the wet conditions. And as I said, whoever stopped making the mistakes was going to be in trouble. Unfortunately, the Eels got penalised late in the game when they had the Steelers in their own half. The Steelers were able to advance the ball down the other end of the field and scored that heartbreaking try where, unfortunately, the Eels couldn't defend against them. They'd done, again, I come back to it, they'd been holding the Steelers out, the second-place team. They'd only been able to score off the kicks. And a lot of that came down to the lack of kick pressure that the kicker was really able to, it was almost like a training run, again, an unopposed training run, because she was able to set, take her time, put the kicks up. And there was maybe a tiny bit more kick pressure in the second half, but in the first half, like, she was literally just standing there, having to think about where she's going to kick it, and then kicking it. Like, that's how much time she had. It almost felt like an eternity watching her set.
It felt like more time than she would have had in a training run to get
yes.
Like, just the Eels completely lost their direction in terms of the off the ball stuff, and that is usually one of the most telling areas, isn't it, when it comes to how dialed in and hungry a team is, and just how much they're sort of like just feeling their own rhythm is when you got guys or girls putting those pressures on both the kicker, the kick chase, the cover defense, all that sort of stuff. And that definitely, unfortunately, unraveled for Parramatta against the Steelers. And I'll tell you what, if you're off your off your pace or off your mark in that regard against a team like Canterbury, they're going to feast.
Can I just give you the because I just jumped into the stats because when we're doing our live blog of the games, these stats aren't available. They normally come in about halfway through the week. The match stats to give people an idea about what we're talking about. And remember that the Eels were playing the second place Steelers in this game. Completion rates 80% by the Steelers, 51% by the Eels.
And even worse, that's a 51% completion rate on 44% of the ball. The Eels got starved of possession in this game. That means that every set is that much more precious to complete because you're sort of behind the eight ball. And that also led to a plus 4 and a bit minutes time of possession favour for the Steelers, which doesn't seem that much in the context of an NRL game across 80 minutes, but these are 60-minute games. So you trim off 20 minutes and it's a big swing.
Now, let me then bring in how well they defended in spite of the errors. And this is where we keep coming back to, if they can cut out the errors, they can go a long way towards winning the game. Because, again, the Steelers are one of the powerhouses in this grade, right? Effective tackle rate, wait for this, 96.15%. Tackles made, 250 by the Eels to the Steelers, 170. And I should point out the Steelers' effective tackle rate was 82.52%. Missed tackles, Eels 10, Steelers 24. Ineffective tackles, wait for this, Eels 0. 0 ineffective tackles, Steelers 12. And now, here's a stat which contributed in a big way, especially at the end, penalties.
Conceded, yep.
6-1. So the Eels only received one penalty all match. And as it turned out, the last one that they conceded was the match-defining one. But, errors 14-12.
And when we talk about how it's so important to not get in your own way in these games, these are the stats that really back it up, Sixties, because you see a team that can win. You see a team that is willing to defend. But by the same token, they made 80 more tackles than the Steelers while barely missing any. So they've shouldered, what, how many is it? Like 14 more sets pretty much of defense. And that is what takes a toll when you're off the ball stuff. Is when you make that many more tackles, of course you're going to be fatigued, and you still want to see players, whether it's boy or girl, push through the fatigue and still put some pressure on the kicker, but it does take a toll, and that's why it's so important to not be coughing up the ball. And you look at the penalties and you look at the errors. Like the Eels are only +2 on errors to the Steelers, 14-12, but making 14 errors in any game, regardless of conditions, I know it was wet, but it's going to be a challenge to overcome. So that's what, when we sort of hammer home about how much we want them to stop tripping themselves up, that is why. Because we know this is a good team. We know that they can compete. We know that they can really ask questions of the best teams. This was the second-place Steelers, and now they take on the first-place Dogs. They're going to need to bring that same defensive effort with less errors and a little bit more polish off the ball, and then who knows what they can do. But they enter this week as heavy underdogs for a good reason, because equally as much as we've been critical of their own issues there, but the Dogs are just that good a team. So they're going to need to be on their best. And this might be a case of going back to what you said for the Lisa Fioa, while a win would be incredible, this is a chance to make a statement physically and psychologically against the Bulldogs. Sort of get yourself into the trenches, maybe crack a few bones, bloody some noses relative to football terminology, and set yourself up for next week where you start to make your run for the finals.
Yeah, and John, we're going to keep banging on about the errors, but they can undo all those aspects of the game that the Eels do so well. The Eels defend well. Like those stats speak for themselves. You know, like, and you talked about like the virtually an extra 14 sets, and you go, how on earth does that come? You get an extra 14 sets when the error rate's like 14 to 12. We saw the penalties 6-1, so you can see like extra sets there. But it's also when the errors occur. So if you're making a mistake early in the set, you're giving up not only time in possession for yourself, but you're also handing over an advantage to the opponent because you're stopping them from having to do as much defensive work. And you know, if you make an error at the start of the set as opposed towards the end of the set, you know, it's meters, it's defense that the opposition's having to do. It's not putting the opponent under as much pressure. You're just loading up your own work. And even though the Steelers made their share of errors last week, look at the difference in the defence that the teams have to make. So we need the girls to get those completions done. You know, it's a case of Coach Shah Henry has obviously done such an exceptional job with them with their defence. And it's obviously frustrating because coaches work so hard, and the messaging would be obvious about, you know, let's complete our sets, girls. You know, let's focus on some, you know, decent ball security. Let's not throw a pass that's not needed. Let's not throw a pass to a player who's not in a better position than us. Let's keep the focus. And, you know, the mistakes happen. The girls themselves have to believe, look at what we did. Look at what we're doing in defence. You know, we're holding on really, really strong. We're doing exceptionally well in that area. Cut out the errors. The game's going to be so much easier for us. We're going to compete. And again, this is a case of it is really, really difficult to tip against a juggernaut team like the Bulldogs. But it's the same thing as what we talked about with the Lisa Fiaola Cup, is this is a team with a lot of potential. Let's cut out the errors. Let's really compete in this match, and let's ask questions of the Dogs and see how they respond to it.
And I just realised I want to apologise to the Tarsha Gale. I was conflating the Lisa Fiaola loss to the Tigers of their effort. So I got that one wrong, but the rest of it stands true though in terms of the errors, right? 60s. If they can get on top of that, there is no reason why they can't be competitive with the Bulldogs and really set a platform for the finals. So I am keen to see how they handle this one, because I think this game will say a lot about their approach to the finals. I think if they get you know, shellacked by the Bulldogs, cop a shellacking and get, you know, 50 or 60 put on them, that's going to be, well, it's not exactly rocket science to suggest that's going to be detrimental to their finals push. But if they're competitive, then that could really ignite a spark in this team. So really keen to see what they do out of Kellyville. And if you are out there, you'll get a trio of games with the two women's pathways games alongside the Jersey Flag. So that will be at the expense of seeing the NRL and Cup games though. So bear that in mind. But certainly something to consider with how your weekend lines up. All right, big fella, let's move on. So we go now to the male side of the pathways, where the Eels start with the Harold Matthews. A rare bit of a considerate, I don't know what was the background to it, but a rare bit of considerate scheduling here. They play on Sunday. It'll be out at the Narrabeen, the Sydney Academy of Sports and Recreation. Used to be NSWIS back when I was in school, 60s, and I was there for footy. You were there for school camps. But it is an iconic location, isn't it?
Yeah, I had to take many a school camp there with the sport and rec. It was always a good week for the kids that was out there. And it also meant that, you know, if it was scheduled for, camp was scheduled for November, normally have a sneaky look at Manly.
Yep, because I was going to say, Narrabeen, of course, means the Sea Eagles, and that's who the Eels are taking on in the final week of the Harold Matthews. This one kicks off 10 o'clock a.m. On that Sunday, and the Eels come into this game sitting in 8th place, 4 wins, 3 losses, taking on the Sea Eagles, who are just above them, 5 wins, 2 losses in 5th place. Points differential slightly in Manly's favour by about 34 points. So they've got slightly better offense, but reasonably better defense, at least based on the weight of the season. And the Eels are coming off a crucial crucial win against the Central Coast Roosters, who were in second place at the time, but they've dropped the place because of the loss of the Parramatta Eels. Talk about tension, that one, 60s. Talon Rosati still in the show at the end with an important penalty goal and then sparking that try via a cutout pass to Kobe McCloskey that then found its way back to the fullback Davis. And the Eels look like this in this clash. Speaking of Davis, Riley Davis is the custodian in the number 1. Kobe McCloskey will run the right sideline with number 2 on his back. And then in the number 5 on the left is Santiago Uwata. You got Cyrus Bloomfield at left centre, Christopher Moala at right centre, 3 and 4 respectively there. In the halves, I just mentioned him, but Talon Rosati has the 6 on his back. He partners Caleb Leata'au. Then you got Kasinga Noah and Billy Fanene starting in the front row with Jiro Trey Stewart at dummy half, Michael Nower and Samuel Polly, his second week back on an edge officially, will be in the edge back row slots, with Hayden Bell showing his versatility again, having played dummy half but now locked forward. Zach Withers, Curtis Brown, Chase Attard and Epipara Tahu Apiata are your interchange players. Strantz Shamkul, Jermaine Fai-Afiu and Zane El-Medine, the extended roster there. The Eels 60s, I thought that was a very, very good game against the Central Coast Roosters last week, especially considering the conditions. That they were, we mentioned it with the ladies, but it was very testing stuff. And I thought that contest defensively from both sides was outstanding, some of the best I've seen in the grade. And you talk about sort of being a building effort. The Eels have been building defensively for a few weeks now. I think against the Western Suburbs Magpies, they were equally resilient in defence. And maybe slightly less because they managed to keep the second-placed Roosters to a single try, given all the possession that they had on inside Parramatta's half. And, yeah, they have had their struggles this year. They've been a frustrating team to follow and blog for because you know how good they can be, but they've, again, self-sabotage and just runs of concentration lapses have really hamstrung the team. But with going back to their bye in round 4, they've comfortably beaten the Panthers, narrowly fell to the Raiders. That was a very frustrating one. They've then accounted for the Magpies, accounted for the Roosters, and they have the Seagulls to close it out. If you go back and look at their sort of their docket since the bye, it's not been too bad, and they've definitely been building.
Yeah, John, last week was a really physical battle against the Central Coast Roosters. Like a really like one of the most physical battles that I'd seen at a Harold Matts level for in memory, and fired up, definitely fired up. A 10-6 scoreline says it all.
You don't see that. You don't see that in Harold Matts, exactly.
No. So, and the possession rate came out at 50-50, like each team equal. And like and as measure of that, I had a look. Time in possession was a matter of seconds difference. It was like the Eels had it for 17:43, and the Roosters had it for 17:55. So, but both teams, there were errors. They were only in the 60s. In the like the Eels, I think were 67%. The Central Coast were at 60% completion rate. That's a measure of the conditions, the physicality, that sort of thing. But where I thought the Eels did really well was their kicking game last week. I thought that it really served the purpose. And I guess what you have to also add in there is composure, because that late try that was engineered down the short side, when you look at it, you had, I think it was Polly, I think that jumped into dummy half, must have got the call from Talon. And they just, and it was almost like it was out of the blue, but it was composed. Like it was really a composed play, because Talon's hit the blind side, found Kobe with that pass out to the wing. Kobe's done quite an amazing job since he's come in mid-season into this team. You know, he's good on both sides of the game, attack and defense. He seems to read it really well. His jams are really good. Anyway, he breaks free down the sideline, passes inside to Riley Davis. And
There was a heart and mouth moment there for a second. There was
it looked like he was going for the early celebration and started to stumble, and thankfully was able to find his balance before putting the ball down. But John, it was edge of the seat stuff. That was the last minute of the game.
Yeah, it was literally the 59th to 60th minute, like transitional.
Yep. There was no. It wasn't a case of going for the kick. It was or positioning it for the field goal, which might be more conventional, and people might think might have involved a bit more composure. I think they kept their nerve in taking an opportunity that was there. Like that. It was very quickly recognised that the Roosters were actually short down the blind side. There was a numbers to take advantage of there, and that was all from about 40 metres out. If people haven't seen the footage, so it wasn't like they weren't in tremendous field position. We were heading towards a draw. The match had basically been between the quarter lines. So I thought it was actually, in being a big play, I actually thought it was also a composed play, because none of it looked rushed. It looked like
so often you see that panic, like just set the undertone to that passage of play at the end of the game when you're chasing a win or a comeback, and that just felt like, yep, this is how we're drawing it up, and this is how we're going to execute it, and let's go do it.
Yeah, and believe me, they needed a win, not a draw. Like a draw was maybe
completely changes the complexion of this week. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, John, as you said, their fate's in their own hands. They are probably the only team who realistically, because you spoke about the Tarsha Gale, it would take
that bizarre situation,
an unlikely, almost an impossible points differential turnaround for the Tarsha Gale to not qualify for finals football. Even if they lose, I think they would have to lose by about 90 points, and one of the other teams would have to win by about 90 points to get that, for them to lose their advantage in the points differential. So that's not going to happen. It comes down to the Harold Matts as to whether the Eels get all 4 grades into finals football. And look, it's a task, because it's against a team that's fairly equal with them in terms of ladder position and performance in the season. We're playing away from home,
early in the morning. Yep.
Early in the morning, but you know what? You got to look at the talent in this team and go, why not? It's like the destiny's in their own hands. It's a winnable game. A very winnable game for them, considering they just beat the second place Roosters. So I am going to tip them to get the job done this week. But like we said about the other grades, errors, control your errors, complete the sets, and especially complete your set after points. Don't let the opponent have an opportunity to strike back immediately. Complete it. So,
one thing worth mentioning too is that this is Josh Hodgson's team, right? 60s, and he copped some criticism early on because the team wasn't realising its potential. But again, going back to the results, it's pretty clear they've been building on the back of a defensive ideology. They've been working really hard on that side of the football and letting the talent in the team sort of sparkle of the attack. But they've definitely been building more recently. The result against Illawarra, I think they threw a lot of good shapes at the Steelers. Steelers, the Central Coast Roosters. They produced some good shapes, but given the conditions, they were challenged by a very good team in that regard too. And I think that you can see the growth in Hodgson as a coach across the course of this season. Not to say he's anywhere near the finished product, but he's definitely starting to find his own voice, I think, as the figurehead of his team. And I think that his young charges now responding to him and sort of shaping into their best version of themselves under Hodgson now this year, which definitely seems to slant more to the defensive side of the football, which in junior football is not a bad thing. Points tend to come easy when you're young and talented, but that sort of effort and defense tends to be rarer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, I've laid my cards on the table. I'm tipping a win.
I think you got to back the boys on the effort that we saw last week, on the defensive effort too that we saw against the Western Suburbs Magpies. Just their run in general now. They're going back to that bye, like I said, 60s. They've been on the up and up, and it hasn't always been pretty. But the big win against the Panthers, a narrow loss against the Raiders, which they could have easily have won. That one was definitely one that they would love to have back, and it changes again the complexion this week. But then you have that big win against the Magpies where they had a fascinating mix of champagne football, steely defense, and errors. And then they turn that into an incredible defensive effort against the second-seeded team coming into that week. So, yeah, I think they get this one done. Again, you can't underestimate Manly. They'll be up for this game. These clashes against the Seagulls are always fiery in the junior reps. It feels like there's extra argy-bargy and push and shove going on. But maybe that just galvanizes the Eels. And if they can get this win done, technically speaking, a win should see them into the finals, right? Because they can actually afford to lose and then have results go their way. But it is such a razor-thin margin of for and against you're talking about here that you don't want to even consider that. But, yeah, I think they get the job done, mate.
Yep. Which then brings us to the SG Ball.
Yes, the lone undefeated team for the Parramatta Eels in the junior reps this year. They kick off at 11:30 a.m. Same venue, Sydney Academy of Sport and Recreation, taking on the Manly Seagulls. The Eels, they've actually transformed their roster a little bit in the back end of the season, 60s, and it's been to considerable success, which is impressive given how well they were playing prior to that. But one of those big changes has been Cameron Bamblett at fullback, and he reprises his role here with the number one, being really sharp since coming back into the team. Started the season in the halves, covering for Lorenzo Talatona, and now plays fullback and has been looking real good. Speaking of coming back into the team, Dom Ferrugia missed a week or two as the Eels. I don't know if he was banged up 60s, but the Eels also.
I think he was rested last week.
Eels also qualifying players for the finals too, which is something to consider. But he's back onto that right wing, and he'll partner Anders Johansson down that edge, I believe. No, I'm getting this wrong. He might be Nathan. No. I'm getting lost here, but it's Dom Ferrugia on the right wing for sure, with Aiden Kaburian down the left. Anders Johansson and Nathan Hallett are in the centres, and I think Anders does run the left. So he does run the left, so yeah, it'll be Nathan Hallett down the right. There we go. Got the mirroring into gear. But Lorenzo Talatona will look to continue his outstanding run of form this year, and he's in the 5'8" role with Lincoln Fletcher, equally enjoying a very good season in number 7. Isaac Jim is this his first start, 60s?
I think it is his first in the starting team.
Yeah.
He's been coming off the bench.
Immense for the Eels as an interchange forward. Now gets a chance to start against the Seagulls, and he'll partner Ryder Talangi. Lachlan Koinakis will be the dummy half. Mark Williams back again. I haven't seen Mark for a while. I think he must have been injured across a stretch of this season, but good to have him back in the fold. And I believe this should qualify him for the finals because he played in rounds 1 or 2. And so this is an important one to get under his belt. With Trace Beattie also in the starting back row. Max Popo is your lock forward. Then on the interchange, Tom Summer, Wesley Picodi, Elijah Shane Tapau, and Phoenix Tawasa. Now, those first three, Tom, Wesley, and Elijah Shane, all regular fixtures on the bench this year. 60's doing great jobs. But Phoenix, a talented back rower, gets his another cap to his name and a chance to qualify for the finals. So good rotations there for the Eels. Then the extended roster, Lorima Saukuru and Michael Fililava. So a couple more options there for the Parramatta Eels. But good team, 60s. It's certainly missing a few players. Lorima Rokasuka. We still.
Well, I think he got injured early in the game.
He came off with an ankle or knee injury in that game. I can't recall which part of the leg it was, but he was aided off. So hopefully it's nothing too serious. But also missing, being missing for most of the season, Mason Ong, who had an outstanding game in round 1, but we haven't seen him since. So obviously, an injury
have to see if we can play that up and find out why he's not been available.
I'm just trying to think any other notable absentees that I'm missing off the top of my
Chris
head.
Petrus.
Yeah, Chris Petrus, yes, but is he
Josiah.
just getting rested? Or Josiah Finari, well, that then speaks to getting rested, I guess, here, 60s. So Josiah
you're talking about both back rowers.
Yeah, starting, and they've been starting edge back roles, I think, the entire season. So no surprises that the Eels missing them would be. It's going to be not necessarily a full detriment because we've got some talented players coming in, but I guess it speaks towards the fact that they're getting rotated. But I'm just trying to think of anyone else that we're missing here going into this contest. I'm just having a quick look at Lockie Vella, but I'm not sure if he picked up an injury again. So he'd be there or thereabouts if he's available. And we saw some Kai Wilson earlier this year, but again, not sure where his status is. But yeah, for the most part, the Eels look to be picking a reasonably strong team. Very strong team, honestly. But a bit of rotation going in here, and we hope not too many injuries outside of Larima, who we know was banged up in that game. But coming into this game, 60s, if I can find my ladder, Manly 2 points, 1 win, 7 losses. Eels 15 points, 7 wins, 1 draw. This is first versus third loss. Sorry, the Bears and the Dragons are below the Seagulls. The Eels should be punching their ticket to the finals in first place here. Again, you don't count the chickens before they've hatched, and you don't necessarily take the ladder seedings as a be all end all when it comes to these results. But Eels come into this game half a win ahead of the Rabbitohs, carried the draw that they shared back in round 5. With the Rabbitohs losing losing a game beyond that. Sorry, the Eels drew the Roosters round 2, but beat the Rabbitohs round 4. There we go, got my data right now. And that was the Rabbitohs' only loss bar in that draw as well. And that's why the Eels are half a win ahead. And they need to win to ensure that they finish on top of the table. But by that same token, the worst they can finish is second 60s, because the Raiders are 3 points behind the Eels. So that's a top 2 finish is guaranteed, but you want to finish the season on top with an undefeated record, don't you?
Oh, look, I mean, that's the ideal result. Last week was arguably their worst performance of the season. Certainly the first half, anyway.
The first half was brutal. They were running all over the Bears, but then were just coughing the ball up. And it just felt like we were sort of harkening back to that game we referenced a few years back out at the University Oval, I think it was, where we end up stealing a win against the Bears in torrid conditions, and it was like, oh my God, like how did this happen? But they found their gears in the second half.
Yeah. So I don't know what the completion rate was in the first half, but I am assuming it was below 50%, because the overall completion rate ended up 63%. And I don't remember anything like the errors in the first half occurring in the second half. I mean, we saw, I think it was 5 second half tries from the Eels. And they clicked into gear in attack, as opposed to that first half where really the score flattered the Eels at halftime, the 10-0 score, because you had that incident where the Eels were leading 6-0, and then in the last minute of play, the Bears got possession in the Eels' quarter. They grubbered behind the line. I think it might have been the back rower from the Bears chased through on the grubber kick and seemed to have a simple grounding to do of the ball. So he sort of did that slide in behind the ball with the attempt to, and almost like a lateral slide in and stretching out with their hands just to ground the ball, rather than actually diving on top of the ball. And it looked ugly. The ref ruled that he didn't control the grounding. And of course, we then saw the Eels race away for the try via that quick play, the 20-metre tap. And it was Cameron Bamblett. Like, he immediately saw, here's an opportunity, picked up the ball as soon as the ref called it. The Bears were half pied, like celebrating a try, as the refs called no try. Bamblett's sprinted out to the quarter line. Lincoln Fletcher knew what was Lincoln Fletcher and
Lorenzo,
they knew what was on. Like, they're sprinting up with him, so that Bamblett's found Fletcher as soon as he's encountered any defender, and without hesitation, Fletcher just shoveled the ball on to Lorenzo, who's then run 60 metres untouched to the corner. And it's gone from potentially being 6-all at half-time, and maybe a reasonable reflection of the first half, to being a 10-0 lead. And to me, that seemed to break the heart of the Bears. And the Eels went on with it then. Obviously had a good talking to at half-time by Coach Mitchell Lewis. and they went on with it in the second half, and you saw certainly more of what they were capable of in scoring all those second half tries. John, you've referred to them through the year as the cardiac kids.
They passed that mantle on to the Harold Matthews in recent weeks, but yes, they found a way to make games fascinating and generated quite a few huge comebacks in the course of those games. And now they've sort of consolidated into a higher tier, it feels like. But I suppose that the silver lining there is that this is a team that has shown that they can win tough games and find ways to win when victory seems improbable. And that obviously serves you well when it comes to sudden death football, which is just around the corner. But it is no guarantee that you're going to be going deep into the finals. You need to be cognizant of that just because you've been good at these single-digit wins or single-digit margin of victory wins, you're not going to necessarily carry that all the way through to the grand final. But they are sort of forearmed and forewarned about that. They know how to play this kind of football that you want to see in the finals. And, yeah, in more recent weeks, they've been able to convert that into bigger wins. So it's a very talented squad, 60s. We've seen some very good SG ball squads in the past. Obviously, the 17 and 23 squads stand out as premiership winners. But we've seen some teams around that. I think it might have been 19. And then I'm just trying to figure another one that really jumps out. But there's been a couple of really good squads. But this squad's up there. Very well coached. Mitchell also has done a fantastic job getting his Chargers up for this season. They are very well drilled. They play great football both in and out of structure. They can throw great shapes. And then you also got guys like Lorenzo Talatano who are just dynamic. The moment play breaks down a fraction, they just seize on it. Lincoln Fletcher's the same. He organises the team really well, but can then slip into a gear playing off an offload. So
both the halves have very, very good running games.
Yes.
And Talatana is just next level evasive. Like his footwork, he scored some individual tries this year that, when the team seems to have needed it the most. But what you've got again is that well balanced team, and to me their greatest quality, John, is that never say die, and even when it just hasn't clicked into gear for them, they find a way at key moments to get that win some way, somehow. They find something to get the win happening, and that's a real genuine mark of players that see themselves as winners. And you want to see that in Pathways football, is that players who don't give up, players who always believe that a win's there. It's there to be had, and at no point in the game are they defeated. And whilst it's been edge of the seat stuff, and at times frustrating when they've made some errors and you think they're beating themselves in this game, and we've had many moments this year where we go, they're beating themselves, and then next thing they produce something out of the bag that's just gets the job done. So we spoke last week about, the prospects of players coming through for the SG Ball, and we're about to do that with the Tarsha Gale at the end of this podcast. But we were really talking about the qualities of a group that was going to serve players well coming through. There are individuals who will be in contention down the track for an NRL spot, be it at the Eels or somewhere else, and you have to say that about Pathways players. You end up saying being at the Eels or somewhere else because clubs can't keep everyone, and if a player feels they're talented enough, they'll try their prospects elsewhere. There's plenty of examples that are around the NRL, but not just for Eels clubs. The Eels as a club, have a look at the Penrith players that are applying their trade elsewhere. What's the name of the 5'8" that's up at the Dolphins?
Katoa.
Katoa.
Yeah.
Out of Penrith Pathways, NRL deal with the Dolphins, like straight out of Pathways.
Yeah,
It happens.
It's the unfortunate reality. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is, and and we've seen it where it's happened a little bit further down the track, like with Ethan Sanders and Blaze Talangi, because their path ends up being blocked at NRL level. So they end up taking their chances elsewhere. So whether, the players end up being first graders at the Eels, and we hope that's the case, or whether they end up elsewhere, there's a collection of players in the SG ball team that will have an NRL future. So to this week, John, I think they win, and I think they will really use this match as a tune-up for finals. I just see, especially after last week, perhaps a ruthless performance from them coming up. I honestly think that's what Mitch Lewis will be looking for from his team. A ruthless, let's get this job done this week. Let's play the sort of football we're planning to play in the finals. We've seen last year, because it happened in the Harold Matts, there were 3 undefeated teams that went into finals football. And the Warriors, no, it was SG Ball, wasn't it? Was it SG Ball or Harold Matts? I'm trying to remember. Anyway, there were 3 undefeated teams. The Warriors went through them in the finals football. Might have been us.
We're definitely one of the teams.
No, but I mean, I think it might have been SG Ball. Anyway, we lost the first week because it was 1 versus 5, I think. And anyway, we lost our first.
Harold Matt. So it was part of his team that has now since graduated into SG Ball. Yes. Guys like Lincoln and Anders and I think Lockie Vella too. A few more that I'm probably missing there, but yeah, we got them week 1 in the finals, and we accounted for them in round 1, and they just stormed through all the undefeated teams.
Yeah, so we finished 3rd on points differential from memory. No, we had a draw. That's right. That's right. It was Wests and was it the Bulldogs were also undefeated, but they never had to play each other.
That's right.
We had to play both of them.
And we drew with both of them
against both of them. That's it. Yeah. So we finished behind them on the ladder. If they had have had to play each other, there would have been unless they drew. But you assume one of them was going to lose that game, and then that's one of the top spots for the Eels. But as it turned out, I think we finished 3rd on the ladder, and then we drew the Warriors. Lost the first week, we're gone, and then the next week, the Warriors disposed of, I can't remember which was first, the Dogs or the Magpies, and then the week after that they won the grand final. So in 3 consecutive rounds, defeated the undefeated teams. So you can go through the regular season undefeated, but finals football is a completely different thing. So Mitch Lewis will want the Eels to be playing finals football, I would say, this week. This is literally the warm-up game for finals football. So yes, John, I see a ruthless performance coming up, and I tip the Eels to win. I tip the Eels to win very well.
I'm right with you there, and I think it's a big week for some of the fringe players, 60s, because obviously you're going to have the likes of Funa Ayuto and Petrus coming back into the back row and whatnot, but players like Isaac Jiminy's first start. He's not a fringe player, but this is a chance for him to impress his starting credentials. But guys like Mark Williams coming back from injury, Trace Beattie, who's been really solid for the Eels off the interchange, Phoenix Tawasa, who gets his 2nd or 3rd game of the year, just make an impression, and if opportunity comes knocking through the finals, have a little bit of form under their belts. But beyond that, it is a very good team. Cameron Bambutt really solidifying himself at the fullback role now, and credit to Nathan Howard too, 60s, for getting bumped out of the number 1 role, but then doing really well in the centres. The try he scored on the weekend, the kick chase was phenomenal. It was obviously a caught shot of an attacking kick in behind the left edge of the opposition, the Bears, and he came flying after the ball and touched down the corner brilliantly. So yeah, I just get through this game unscathed in terms of injuries. Obviously, that's a key one, and that's not always something you can control. Non-contact injuries and wrestle and whatnot can influence that, but try and get through unscathed and play, like you said, finals football, and really gear up for what comes ahead the week after. Really keen to see the end of this one.
Mate, you mentioned Phoenix to us, and he was one of the players that I
preseason
put a note down in the trial against Penrith, I think it was, up at Windsor, and I said, "Gee, he had a whale of a game. He might be one to keep an eye on." Now he's been a fringe player for the season, so I'm glad to see him getting a start in this game. So, as you say, big match for fringe players to maybe force their way into strong consideration for the finals. John, we now will have a bit of a look at, along the same vein as we did with the SG Ball, what are the prospects for an NRLW future for the players that are in the Tarsha Gale team? Now, we're not going to put pressure on individual players and declare this one will make it, this one won't. We're not going down those lines, but we'll talk about, I guess, in as general a fashion as we can. We probably can't avoid, giving some individuals a mention. But one of the interesting things is that there is no age team between the Tarsha Gale and senior women's football, because from here, unless they just go back to playing local age football, or local A-grade football for the women's, the next step for them professionally is the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership, which is open age. And we already saw last year some players get a taste of Harvey Norman competition who are back playing Tarsha Gale. And of course, the people that we're talking about, we saw both Riverlea Arlo and Fontaine Tafunga get a taste of Harvey Norman Women's Premiership last year. You would assume then that they are likely to get a taste of that again this year, if not get towards the fringe maybe of NRLW. So maybe when we're looking at this, we might be more specifically looking at who's likely to progress to the open women's team for Parramatta in the Harvey Norman, because as soon as you're playing that Harvey Norman, you're very close. That's like literally being in New South Wales Cup and being in contention for first grade. So I've already rattled off both Riverlea and Fontaine. I'm glad that the two of them wear different coloured headgear, because with the hair that comes out, like there's and look, there is distinguishing feature. I think one has a leg tattoo, the other one doesn't. But I find there's a lot of similarity about their running styles, the way they play. Even though one plays on an edge, one plays in the middle, I think they both have very similar qualities. They both run the ball very well. They're physical in defence. And I think both of them have good game sense. So it was no surprise to me last year that they got a taste of Harvey Norman Women's Premiership. Anything you want to add to that about those two particular players?
Yeah, look, they have a long career in rugby league ahead of them. It feels like they're both outstanding talents that also combine pure skill and potential with hard work, and that's always a fantastic cocktail in the context of a professional career. And the fact that they were able to play senior football last season and not be completely lost at sea, they actually made an impact there, speaks volumes to the talent that they possess. So I think you can really pencil them in for probably a sooner rather than later trajectory to the NRLW. But beyond that, the Tarsha Gale team, it becomes a little bit hard to evaluate because of all the errors they've made, but there's no doubting that there's some NRLW players across there. Again, you're not trying to put a spotlight on any player in particular to put pressure on, but we've seen some great play from players great passages of play. I hate when you do playing players, but that's a little slip from me. But like Kalia Gray's been awesome as a ball-playing back rower. There is always room for that kind of skill at the higher levels. Obviously, you can't just be... It's not even a one-trick pony in that regard, but obviously you need to have a well-rounded game beyond that. But Kylie has shown she can run the ball. She can defend pretty well too. I like some of the edge players in this team too. I think that they've got, beyond the ones that we just mentioned, but I think they've got potential there. Elias Sufan and Semili Guntawa have shown some great signs. And halves are some of the most volatile to predict because making that jump to senior football where the game speeds up and your decision-making processes get challenged that much faster as the primary on-ball handler, it becomes that much more difficult. It can be very hard to assign because it reminds me, we saw, was it a cousin of Isaiah Yo, 60s a few years back? Was it Sienna Yo? Who absolutely carved Parramatta up.
Oh, yeah.
And looked like it was made for NRLW the next year. I don't think she's consolidated that kind of way that we would have fought based on that game. And obviously one game sample size is always, you can't extrapolate from, but she looked awesome, and just making that jump's difficult. So bear that in mind. But yeah.
That's why, I see the way that I look at it with the team. This is why I wanted to talk about them as a team as a whole. Every single one of these players needs to continue on their rugby league journey. Now, whether it means that they go back to the local competition and they play that for a couple of years before they end up advancing, say, to a Harvey Norman women's premiership level, or whether they are fast-tracked into Harvey Norman level football, as has been the case with Riverlea and Fontaine, that remains to be seen, because players will mature at different levels. I mean, you just referenced young Yo for the Steelers. Now, because, we're not seeing her in dispatches, we don't know where she's at in terms of her development. Has she continued playing? Is she still within the Steelers system? I don't know. But there are players there who their journey might take a little bit longer than others. And it could come down to how many years they've been playing rugby league for a start. Have they been? And it's more likely that it's happening and going to continue to happen, that there will be uninterrupted football for a lot of the girls that come into junior representatives. But in the early days of junior representatives, there were girls in these teams who might have played up to under 12s and then didn't play for, another 4 or 5 years before they were playing Tarsha Gale Cup. So they had an interrupted journey in rugby league. Maybe they went off and played rugby union. Maybe they just went to touch or tag. We don't know. But it's more likely that a number of these girls have had an uninterrupted journey. But there may be some that have had an interruption and have come back to rugby league or have come from rugby union. So maybe their journey's going to take a little bit longer. But I think every single player in this Eels group should continue to play rugby league when they graduate from Tarsha Gale. And whether that journey ends up taking them to senior professional women's football or not, I guess will be determined by how they develop and what opportunities they get. But, we've just mentioned a couple that we can't help but mention because of the fact that they've already had that journey last year. In fact, in Fontaine's case, she was playing Lisa Fiola.
Yeah.
Junior
year of her Tarsha Gale apprenticeship here. So absolutely played senior football as a Lisa Fiola eligible, individual, which is crazy. But like you said, 60s, look at the middle forwards. Tess McWilliams, Taylor Falanico, obviously we mentioned River already, but Amani Ali Ava'e, and then you've got Lillian Pooley there. But we're seeing more of the first three of the season. Any one of those three could, feasibly progress through the NRLW, but they're going to need to do their apprenticeship in Harvey Normans. And that's where it's funny because we're kind of like in that old school era on the male side, but where back in the day you needed to do your proper apprenticeship in reserve grade. And for a lot of these players, it's going to be the case for the ladies is do your time in Harvey Norman Women's Premiership, and then you'll be seasoned for NRLW. And
John, just to that point, right? Our Harvey Norman women's team was an extraordinarily young team last year, and there was some tough learning for them.
Very, some great football, and then some struggles, and like you said, some real take your medicine, learn the lesson moments.
Oh yeah, because some of them were advanced, from straight from Tarsha Gale. Some had been Tarsha Gale the year before, but they were all relatively young in comparison to some seasoned players that they were playing against. So, yeah, there were lessons learned, and it's obvious that the Eels want to use their Harvey Norman team. Not, they're not going to necessarily fill it out with players who are experienced at Harvey Norman level, and maybe haven't got an NRLW future ahead of them, but are just, seasoned. If we use the word, word from the male side of the game, hardheads. It's very much, from what was on evidence last year, a case of literally it's a development group for the NRLW, as well as the people from the extended NRLW team that aren't selected on a weekly basis. So that's what it basically seemed to be. The extended part of the NRLW squad, the players that were coming through the pathways, put them together. There's your Harvey Norman team. And I think there's a future for all, a lot of these girls at that level. And
from that Harvey Norman's team we saw last year, there's going to be players coming through now into NRLW this year. We spoke of it with Steve Georgalis when we touched base a couple of weeks ago, but that's how that pathway system works, right? And it's just the natural development cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, I think we've probably covered as much as we should at this level without putting undue pressure on different players or failing to mention some players who may well go on to play NRLW. What we've said is it fits in a lot with what we had to say about their prospects this week, which is, as a group, we've got talented individuals. We've got it not quite coming together as a team, mainly because of things like far too many errors. But as a group, they've come together defensively, I think, and really that's probably what stood them in good stead in terms of their points differential. They got lots of attacking points up early in the season. They haven't conceded many points this season.
Only that Cronulla loss really stands out as a
yeah. So they've had those narrow losses,
and that all speaks to, again, the potential here for the team. So being able to maximise your wins when they're available, but also minimise your losses when they come to you, they are important parts of managing a season. It's just about now putting a lid on those errors and just getting into gear and playing your best football. And if they can, they'll go deep into the finals. It'll be a matter of whether they can challenge the likes of the Bulldogs, not just once but twice. That's going to be contingent there, but they could absolutely make a real run here, and I want to see that. I want to see them be able to finish the season. It doesn't have to be a premiership, but on a really positive note with some momentum for the finals, and then you'll see a lot of these ladies then trickle into Harvey Norman's later in the year when it runs alongside the NRLW.
Yep. So, John, that just about concludes our junior reps preview for this week, plus the look into the future for the Tarsha Gale group. As usual, we're certainly not shy about putting the minutes into our podcasts. Our podcasts are ideal if you're doing a long road trip.
Yep, or you got a bit of downtime at work and just you want some background noise to help drown out the hours and the minutes. So we
I get a lot of comments from people who say, I've listened to your podcast. I've got through the first hour. I'll work on the second hour after, when I get a bit more time. Yep. So we're well aware that when we start talking footy, we've probably got a lot of opinion that we want to express. But look, that's what you get with us. We make no apologies for that. That's just who we are. And we appreciate the positive feedback that we get, and people have been very, very kind in what they've had to say about us recently. I was asked, how many podcasts we do in a week? And then I stopped and thought about it. I think we're up to about 6 some weeks, which we are. Once we do our preview, our news, our junior preview, our senior preview, our live appearances, any special podcasts, and then an instant reaction. And it's just, it just keeps mounting up, John. It just keeps mounting up. But thank you to our sponsors of the junior preview, Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels. Again, such generous sponsorship of our coverage of Junior Rugby League, but also just incredibly generous support of Junior Rugby League. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that Para Leagues, I think it was over 300,000 last year, might have been 350, something like that, that they pour into Junior Rugby League in the Parramatta district. So we can't thank them enough. And also, if you want to get behind and support the programs that Parramatta runs for Junior Rugby League and for the community, don't forget the Eels Foundation. Don't forget the 50-50 raffle. You can get involved in that way just to say, you know what, I'm invested in the future of rugby league in the Parramatta district and in the community. So, John, thank you. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.